Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session. We're so glad you're here. I'm Jordan Harvey, Senior Account Manager from Onboard Experiential, aka OBE, your moderator for this discussion about how Facebook stayed agile to help small businesses adapt and survive with its 2020 Summer of Support program. In our industry, certain words get thrown around a lot: agility, partner, support, digital pivot. Some of our viewers might even be playing buzzword bingo right now. But with this partnership, this program, those words took on new meaning. We truly became one agile team, committed to supporting small businesses and willing to pivot as many times as necessary. I'd like to welcome our panelists for this discussion: Janelle Mungo, Event Marketing Manager, Small Business at Facebook; Keith Baker, Thought Leadership Lead at Facebook; Zach Bono, Creative Strategist at OBE; and I'd like to invite all of you to ask questions in the chat window as you think of them. While this session is pre-recorded, both Janelle and Keith are here to respond. Let's start with some background, Janelle. This wasn't Facebook's first time engaging small businesses, was it?
Hi, no, it was not. First of all, thank you for having us. We're excited to talk about Facebook's commitment to small business, which is over a decade going strong. We started as a humble roadshow called Boost My Business back in the day, where a few of my colleagues would take some pop-up banners, check them onto flights, and go to any town in America just to share the free tools and low-cost tools that Facebook has for small businesses so they can compete in what at the time was an ever-growing digital economy and now is really the staple of how small businesses can compete in the market right now. So we've been on the road for a long time. It's grown into actually a global program. We've rebranded into Boost with Facebook. We produced over 200 in-person events last year alone. And we have a ton of virtual offerings through Blueprint, which is our free education tools. We now do things like Instamarkets and boot camps. And so our commitment has been going on for a while, and we always try and make sure that we put the small businesses first, making sure that we're meeting them where they're at so they can really thrive in today's economy.
Yeah, and OBE's really been there for a lot of this, helping build some of these in-person events. And it's such an interesting challenge. It's such a cool experience to make these things for digital companies who maybe don't always have that face-to-face interaction with their customers. So you can really create those amazing experiences for them. And that experience we had in those in-person events would turn out to be super useful on this program because we knew these small businesses, we knew the customers, we knew what they came to these events for. So when we needed to make an authentic digital version, we were there. We had the experience.
So, Janelle, explain how Summer of Support started out, before 2020 turned into 2020.
Yeah, we had such big plans for 2020. Summer of Sport was actually never supposed to be. We had this great, grand idea of going on a 100 city road tour throughout the US to cities big and small with these huge outfitted semis that were going to bring a highly experiential training moment to small businesses. So, along with agency partners, including OBE, we had these plans to go around and produce these moments, some bigger in about 25% of the cities. We're going to plus up with community markets and various things, and others with bot integrations, Prize and Delight, and some of our traditional training, all built in and traveling in a truck. So it was going to be really exciting. We were 3 weeks away from launching in Raleigh when we really had to make the tough decision to pull the events down due to COVID-19. At the time, we of course thought it was just going to be a slight delay. And as we started to see, we knew that that program just couldn't exist this year. We'll see when we might be able to bring it back once we're able to do in-person events. But the safety of both our employees, but also our attendees was number one. So it was hard to pull down the work. We put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in it, as I'm sure a lot of people watching had done throughout the year. It's never easy to see the work that you've put so much effort into get pulled down. But what was even harder was we knew that small businesses were going to be so severely impacted during COVID-19 that we just wanted to make sure that we could make a quick pivot and figure out how to get the training and the resources to them as quickly as possible.
Huge challenge and really ambitious goals given the team had to regroup. How did the roadshow evolve as the team pushed forward?
Our first pivot into Plan B was always on webinars. So just bringing the information and the training content to small businesses as quickly as possible in a really nimble, light way that I know folks were doing when we first went into this virtual world. We actually still use the webinars and still host them. It's great ways to get into small regionalized events in a lightweight and easy way. So there are definitely things that we still do, as well as producing some of these larger events.
Yeah, and Plan C was a 2-day training focused virtual event. It was really us taking what we were so used to doing in person and moving it online. It was tight, training focused, get people in, get them what they need, get them out. But again, it was us trying to do what worked in person online. And the more we pushed up against that tension, the more we started to realize it really wasn't working. It really wasn't reaching people in the way that they needed to be reached. So we pivoted again to Plan D, which was still a 2-day training event, but we started to think a little more broadly about it. We started to layer in some thought leadership, layer in some inspiration. We started to think a little bit more broadly about how people were going to be coming from different geographic regions. They were going to have different levels of need, different familiarity with the technology. And I think most crucially, this was when we stopped thinking about it as a virtual version of what we'd done in person. So we stopped saying, what's the virtual version of that activation or that footprint? And we started to think about what could be online first. So instead of trying to translate the solution like a one-on-one session with a product expert, we started re-asking ourselves the question. So how do we help a struggling small business owner who's uncomfortable with technology?
And that's where we came to Plan E. Just a few weeks before our launch, the murders of George Floyd and Tony McDade came to light across social media, which also brought up the murder of Breonna Taylor. And with that, protests around the world erupted. So we knew that it just wasn't the right time to go out in the way that we were thinking. We needed to make sure that we were giving space for those people who had, needed some time mentally and personally. We also realized that small businesses in the cities where protests were happening were being affected by closures, while other small businesses were reopening in cities where COVID restrictions were being lightened. So as a country and as a world really at that time, we were just all in a different place. And so we knew that we needed to bring the content in a different way. What we did was we pivoted to a 6-week always on social first strategy, really leveraging our platform. So we took a lot of the content that we had already planned to create. We made sure that it was appropriate for what was happening right now, since it was filmed at a different point. And it also allowed us the opportunity to create new content, both for small businesses that needed more advanced training if they were able to reopen and start to drive sales again, but also allowed us to bring in content that had a D&I focus for inclusion in the workplace or, safe spaces for your customers. And the way that we delivered it we put it through on Facebook first and a website second. And that allowed small businesses to be able to watch it whenever they wanted, wherever they wanted, whether they were at home, they were at work, they were on the road. It gave more flexibility to both the consumers who were ingesting the information, but also allowed us flexibility to make sure that we were putting the right and the best information out so that we could meet small businesses where they were with the info that they needed.
After so many iterations, how did you arrive at the final version of Summer of Support, Zach?
Yeah, well, like Janelle said, the needs that these folks had were so much bigger, so much more fluid, so much more sustained than we originally expected that we really did have to change a lot of stuff. We mothballed that 2-day event site. It was actually on the day that we finished primary development on it, so it was basically good to go, but it was no longer the product that people needed, basically. It was no longer what they wanted. So we needed to change. And we knew from what we were hearing from these small businesses, we knew from our own experience, and we knew from just what was going on in the world that we were going to need to meet people in multiple places. It was no longer a if you build it, they will come kind of thing. We wanted to meet people where they were, whether that was in their social feeds or whether they wanted to come to us for a really in-depth learning experience. But as it became bigger, as we added these more of these vectors, it started to become almost an ecosystem of support. And when you have something that big, that long, that sustained, that fluid, it becomes really important to have a really cohesive story or vision to really hold it all together and make it feel like one thing. And that's when we very, very luckily got Keith Baker to join us. He's the thought leadership lead at Facebook, and he was just an expert at keeping this story cohesive. So I should shoot the rest of this answer over to him.
Thanks, Zach. Great to be here, everyone. So excited to be talking to you. I think, Zach, when I think back to that time, what I think about are all the pivots and the challenges that we had. And it was a very difficult time to be planning an event. I don't mean to suggest that we had it worse than anybody else, but it was a time of great disruption. And I think that we were able to think about what small businesses were going through as well at the same time. I think what grounded us during that time and what helped us build the story out were two main things. The first thing is that at Facebook, when we think about events, we're very much thinking audience first. And the second thing is really having an understanding as event marketers of how to engage with an audience. Now, traditionally, that for us, even at Facebook, has been a live audience. But we very recently come out of an event that myself and the team that I work with had to pivot with 3 weeks' notice from a large live event to a completely reimagined virtual event. And we had a lot of experience that we gained from that as to how to pivot from live sessions into what would make compelling content for virtual sessions. And when we teamed that up with the deep knowledge and expertise that Janelle and her team has around the audience that we were speaking to, in this case, small businesses, experience that she's built up over years, she was able to bring insights into what kind of content and what kind of stories the small businesses would appreciate. And we were able to build that into the stories in formats that we had learned about in our recent virtual event. And I think the third thing that we really built on was teamwork, was working together, not just Janelle's small business team and my thought leadership team, but also you guys at OBE with your intense and in-depth knowledge of experiences for audiences. Trusting each other, building on each other, and quickly aligning and communicating with each other enabled us to move this project forward and to tell the stories that we really wanted to tell.
And just 3 weeks later, we launched Summer of Support. So over the course of 6 weeks with social first content, we had over 70 videos produced, including training and thought leadership, as well as highlights of small businesses. We had over 80 speakers with big names like Magic Johnson, Kevin O'Leary, Monique Nelson, who's a titan in the marketing industry, as well as highlighting some of our small businesses from our Facebook Leaders Network who are sharing their stories about how they were pivoting during COVID to inspire other small businesses. And through all of that, we had over 17 million people tune in to watch.
Yeah, it was a giant undertaking, and I think we could spend the remainder of this session talking about all the pivots we made and how we came to each new decision, many of which had huge production ramifications. But Zach, could you tell me some of your highlights?
Yeah, I mean, when I think back on this time, I just think of how fast we were moving, how agile we had to be, and the level to which we just kind of let our silos or the titles we had fall away in order to get the work done. I mean, we were constantly rewriting, redesigning, reworking the website. We would go back and re-edit footage that we had shot, 4 days before, just to make sure that it was still relevant, that it was still speaking the right language, that it was still answering the needs that our audience had. And it was just really cool to see everyone step up like that. I think maybe my favorite moment was when our design director stayed up, I'm pretty sure all night, reading the platform documentation for one of the areas that we were building out, because she just wanted to know how far she could push it. How far could she stretch this platform to really get these SMBs what they wanted? It was this attitude of, I'm not a front-end developer, but I will be tomorrow because I need to be, which was just really cool to see.
There is no doubt that this particular event took us out of our comfort zone. But the agility of the team and the determination of the team to build this into something that would be compelling and engaging for the audience was just a pleasure to be part of. I think that the difficulty, and there's no doubt at all in my mind that that working on this event from a virtual point of view had a lot more challenges than if we would have done it live. I think partly that is because of our experience in live events, but also there's a huge number of extra steps that we need to take along the way in organisation. But what I think I was most proud of was the determination not to see this as a negative, but to see the opportunities that we had to really get creative, to speak to the audience in new ways and ways that would mean that they felt fully engaged with the content, and to take advantages of the opportunities that virtual offered. When I think back to the content we produced and the thought leadership that we produced, a couple of my favorite memories are involve some of our senior executives at Facebook. We had Mark Darcy, who's our Chief Creative Officer, and our business CMO, conduct a panel with that included Jose Andres, and he was in Spain at the time. Now, we could never have magically made him appear on a stage from Spain, but because we were using a virtual format, we were able to speak to him in a restaurant. And I think it gave an added atmosphere to what we were doing and what the messages that we were trying to get across. He also kind of went rogue at one point and went through the restaurant, and it was hilarious. Didn't make the final cut, but it was a really compelling moment for us as a team. I think the other session was our Chief Revenue Officer, David Fisher, who was scheduled to talk with a young entrepreneur who I believe is 12 years old. She was very young. She was brilliant, by the way. But what we were able to do with this virtual format was have David ask her questions, as well as she would ask him questions. And we really broke that up into two parts. Both were equally compelling for different reasons. And I don't think we would have done that had we been live. I think what made me most proud of this team as we went through this event was the heart and soul that people put into each session, from my team who worked directly with the speakers to build the content, to Janelle's team and OBE, really pushing the boundaries and getting as agile as we needed to, never being satisfied and saying, well, this will do because it's been, it's a shortened time frame, so we'll just get something out. We all pushed the boundaries of what was possible. We all tried to get as creative as possible to make this compelling and engaging for our audience, always thinking about that audience and their experience as we went through the whole project.
And now for everybody's favorite part, where we list our takeaways so you can learn from our mistakes. Keith, what did you learn most about how to innovate and deliver the value you'd always intended to?
Yeah, I think to start off with, I'd like to say that as I said earlier, I think leaning in and trusting the teams around you, whether that be entirely internal or whether you're bringing in agencies, there's a wealth of knowledge that people have there. And so to lean in on that and to trust that it's going to get you through difficult times, I think that was a key learning for me. But I think the really first important takeaway from this project was to understand and empathize with your audience. I think that this is something, I have to say, that as I jumped into this project, Janelle really hit this home on what SMBs would find valuable, and really making us focus on their needs in a very difficult time for them. So to have that empathy, to understand what would bring them value, to make things convenient for them, not for us, to really try and build community through the thought leadership and the program that we were bringing together. And I think those things really came through as being effective in some of the numbers that Janelle mentioned a moment ago.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And that actually leads perfectly, both in process and in this conversation, to our second big learning, which is to think experientially. And I know that can kind of sound a little obvious, but I think it is easy to throw out that experiential playbook, that event playbook, when you're doing something virtual, when you're doing something online. But actually, those same practices that we would apply to in-person events in terms of creating attendee journeys is still super useful. Whatever that means for you, whether you're someone who really enjoys making personas, doing interviews, sketching out user journeys, that stuff still applies. You're just trying to find different pain points and different opportunities in that journey. So, ask yourself questions. For us, we ask a lot of questions around environment. Where are people consuming this content? Are they at home? Are they at work? Are they on their laptop? Are they on their phone? And you start to think a little more deeply, what time of day is it likely to be? What time of day works for them? Are their kids distracting them? Are their phones distracting them? Do they have 100 tabs open? Thinking about all these things helps you find those pain points, and you can start sketching out that attendee journey, just like you would if you were worrying about having enough bathrooms at a venue. It just may be that your attendee journey ends up looking more like a web than a nice linear line.
So my big takeaway, which kind of piggybacks a little bit off what Keith was saying, is really leading into collaboration. We had a huge cross-functional team across internals, our agencies, and even our small business community that we really look to help us provide insights. So really thinking about what those strengths are, how can we expand them? We became film producers, and some of us that were, in-person event planners became digital marketers. So we all had to really stretch our boundaries, and we all leaned on each other to know that we could do that. We leaned on both ourselves internally as a team. Bringing in Keith's team was monumental to ensuring that we had that great content going out. And so everything was going out, perfectly packaged to make sure that the small businesses had exactly what they needed, and not anything that they didn't, given that time is of the essence. We also lean so heavily into our agencies. I say this all the time, but I would never survive in this job without OBE. Jordan, who's our account lead, is my actual right hand. And so having them, we spent tireless nights, sleepless nights, really working to make sure that this could come to life, but without leaning into each other and making sure that we were trusting each other and also being honest with each other. Across the board, we as our humans first. We were also dealing with the impacts of COVID-19, having children at home while we were also working. So being honest with where we need someone else to pick up, something to help out. And I think that collaboration really helped to make this not only an amazing end product for the consumer, but also a really special moment for us as a company to be able to look back and say that we did.
So what's next for Facebook after this, Janelle? I'm sure EMS attendees would love to know how you plan to top Summer of Support or build on its successes.
Yeah, Summer of Support was amazing. It was a great experience, but we also learned a lot moving to virtual. We've taken some of those learnings and already put them into work with past events or events happening right now, like Black Business August, Latinx Hispanic Heritage Month for small businesses, and we have a Women's Summit coming up in November. But I think one of the most exciting is we can announce that Season of Support is actually happening right now. So we've taken all the great information from Summer Support and rolled it into a V2, preparing small businesses for what is the busiest time of year, the holidays. So with that, we're really working on how to create a full integrated marketing campaign that Keith's team has been leading on, but really working on honing and perfecting, creating the best holistic marketing strategy as we continue to produce these events.
Yeah, thanks, Janelle. I think that's a really crucial point, that Summer of Support has really advanced what we're doing around integrated marketing through live events. Something that we were working on before Summer of Events, when back in the day before COVID hit, when there were actual live events, we would take a recording from that and try and break that up into bite-sized pieces that we could use in different ways. We could put perhaps a quote up on social media. We could build a longer highlights package that was still a condensed version of the overall session and put that up on watch. And so there were different ways that we were trying to surround our audience with the same message, knowing as we do that it really takes 7 or 8 times to hear a message for you to understand it and take it in. So something that we've been planning before and working on before, but what the new virtual paradigm really gives us an opportunity to do is get ahead of that. Something that we were able to do on Summer Support was to pull in the pre-recorded content beforehand and cut it up and put those bite-sized clips of a thought leadership piece, and instead of putting it after the event, putting it before the event, finding ways to drive people to the main piece of content, and really accelerating those views that we would get virtually, and producing some of the results that Janelle was talking about earlier. I think the other thing that we were able to do with this 6-week run was that we built week-long themes for the content to be bucketed into. And that meant that we were talking about one message every week, and we would perhaps there would be a celebrity piece that would be high engagement on our social channels that would drive to other content that talked about that theme. And I think one of the wonderful things that allowed us to do was to promote some of those training videos, those workshops that the small businesses were finding really valuable. We know that the small businesses were going through an extremely tough time, and many of them were finding new ways to do business. Many of them were going online for the first time, experimenting with digital marketing. And so providing them these workshops was essential to this project. And I think that by breaking this up and having an integrated marketing approach, using content to drive to other content, really helped us to get to those results that Janelle talked about earlier, but also to get the small business community to engage with the content that was perhaps not as big news as a Magic Johnson session. So it's allowed us to do plenty of things. We like what we were able to do with these virtual events. We're carrying it through into the future, and really looking forward to building out whatever findings we can keep going as the world changes, as live events start to come back. Where does that leave our integrated approach? And I'm excited to experiment about that in the future.
Yeah. If I could just hop in on that, piggyback on you, Keith. From an OBE side, it's very much the same. I mean, we grew so much as creatives during this process, and a lot of it was stuff that felt like it was on the horizon already, that it was maybe 2 years out. When we'd be talking about these trends around virtual events, hybrid events, live streaming what we were doing, integrated marketing, it was stuff we've been talking about early in the year as, maybe in a couple of years. And this summer, it really all accelerated. So we were able as an agency to, through this program, really accelerate what we were doing, learn a lot as creatives, and create something really cool. And not to get too sappy here at the end, but I do kind of want to jump back to some of those buzzwords you were talking about earlier, Jordan, because we did create something really remarkable with Facebook, and we were more agile than we thought we could have been. We became closer partners than we ever had before, and we became so comfortable pivoting that it just was remarkable for us.
All very exciting, and I'm sure will be incredibly helpful to small businesses moving forward. I know this was a big accomplishment for our combined teams, and OBE certainly wants Facebook to know how much we'll always treasure that. And that brings us to the end of our session. I want to thank our panelists from both Facebook and OBE for telling this story today, and extend our gratitude to EMS for the chance to share it with you at their virtual event. And thank you for watching. We hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Take care.